On the distant planet of Zephora, under the glow of twin moons, a child was born into a world of towering crystal cities and sprawling bioluminescent forests. Her name was Leora, and from the moment she entered the world, her fate was sealed. Unlike other Zypherans, whose strong, slender limbs carried them effortlessly across their gravity-lightened world, Leora could not walk. Her parents, Zyros and Rayla, were shattered by the news. The greatest minds of Zephora examined her, their translucent hands hovering over her fragile form, scanning with technology beyond human comprehension. Neural realignments, muscle regeneration therapies, and genetic enhancements, none of it worked. The diagnosis was grim. Her legs will never function. The chief healer announced, his voice devoid of emotion. We have no cure. For years, Leora watched from the edges of the playgrounds as other children ran freely, their feet barely touching the soft ground. She dreamed of movement, of feeling the wind against her skin as she ran through the floating gardens. But her reality was far different. She was confined to a hover chair, a silent observer in a world that moved without her. Her parents refused to give up. They scoured the ancient archives, desperate for any mention of a cure, a technology, a miracle. Their search led them to whispers of an unusual primitive species, humans. The Zypherans considered them an inferior race, beings who relied on crude machines rather than biological perfection. But buried deep in the restricted records was a strange, impossible tale. A human invention, an exoskeleton, had allowed paralyzed individuals to walk again. At first, Zyros dismissed the idea as nonsense. How could humans, who barely understood interstellar travel, possess something Zypheran medicine could not achieve? But as he watched Leora struggle to lift her own weight, his resolve hardened. If the great minds of Zephora had failed, then perhaps the answer lay in the unlikeliest of places, Earth. Late one night, in the secrecy of their home, Zyros made a decision that would change everything. I'm going to Earth, he told Rayla, his voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty in his mind. If our people cannot save Leora, maybe the humans can. Rayla's eyes widened in fear. Zypherans rarely traveled to Earth. Contact was limited, and the few who had gone spoke of a chaotic world, filled with war, pollution, and unpredictable creatures. You'll never make it past security, she whispered. They'll stop you before you even leave the planet. I'll find a way, Zyros said firmly. I won't let Leora spend her life trapped. As the moons cast their silver light over the city, Zyros prepared for the journey. What awaited him on Earth, he did not know. But deep inside, he carried a single hope, that somewhere, hidden among the primitive chaos of humanity, was the miracle his daughter needed. Zyros stood at the edge of Zephora's bustling spaceport, the air humming with the low vibrations of departing ships. The towering vessels gleamed under the planet's soft, iridescent light, their smooth surfaces reflecting the bioluminescent patterns of the city below. These ships were not meant for individuals like him. Civilians without clearance had no business here. But Zyros was not just any civilian. He was a father with nothing left to lose. The plan was risky. Disguised as a low-tier technician, Zyros had forged clearance documents, using old access codes from his days working in planetary logistics. It was a flimsy cover, one that wouldn't hold up under scrutiny, but he didn't need it to last long. Just long enough to slip aboard a diplomatic vessel bound for Earth. Zephora maintained only sparse relations with the human planet, mostly through formal exchanges and cautious trade agreements. To most Zepherans, Earth was a backward place, riddled with conflict and pollution, a planet clinging desperately to outdated technologies. But Zyros saw Earth differently now. It was a beacon of hope. As he moved through the crowd, his heart pounded in rhythm with his footsteps. He kept his gaze low, avoiding the piercing eyes of the port security officers. Each step felt heavier, weighed down by the fear of being caught and the slim chance that this mission might actually succeed. But when the sleek silver doors of the ship slid shut behind him, sealing him inside the dim cargo bay, a flicker of relief surged through him. He had made it. The journey to Earth was longer than he expected. The ship traveled through the wormhole network, bending space and time, but Zyros felt every second of the trip. He spent the hours hidden among cargo crates, breathing in recycled air, his mind racing with doubts. What if the stories were wrong? What if human technology was as primitive as the Xyphoran authorities claimed? But then, the image of Leora's face would flash before his eyes. Her soft smile, her determined spirit despite her immobility, and his resolve would harden once more. When the ship finally emerged from the wormhole near Earth's orbit, Zyros crept to a small viewport. The blue-green sphere floated against the vast blackness of space, its swirling clouds and glimmering oceans unlike anything he'd seen before. Earth was beautiful in its chaos, a planet teeming with life and unpredictability. But beauty wasn't what Zyros was after. He needed a miracle. The diplomatic vessel docked at an Earth orbital station, a clunky metal structure compared to Zephora's sleek architecture. As the crew disembarked, Zyros seized his chance. He slipped into the flow of human workers, blending into the crowd as best he could. His slender frame and translucent skin drew curious glances, but he kept moving, his mind focused on the next step. Navigating the human world was harder than he anticipated. The languages, the customs, the sheer noise of Earth overwhelmed his senses. But luck, or perhaps fate, guided him to the outskirts of a city called New Chicago, a sprawling metropolis of glass towers and crumbling old-world structures. Here, amid the chaos, Zyros found what he was looking for. A contact from the restricted archives had mentioned a human scientist named Dr. Elena Vargas, a pioneer in neural prosthetics and exoskeleton technology. She worked in a small research facility, tucked away from the bustling city center. It took Zyros days to track her down, avoiding human authorities and curious onlookers. When he finally stood at the entrance of her lab, he hesitated for the first time. What if she refused to help? What if she saw him as nothing more than an alien intruder? But Leora's face flashed in his mind once more, and Zyros pressed forward. Inside the lab, the air smelled of metal and ozone. Strange human machines hummed softly in the background, and holographic screens displayed complex neural diagrams. At the center of it all stood Dr. Vargas, a woman with sharp eyes and a presence that commanded attention. She turned as Zyros entered, her gaze narrowing with suspicion. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady but wary. Zyros took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly as he spoke. "I am Zyros of Zephora. I need your help." For a moment, silence hung between them, thick and tense. Then, Dr. Vargas crossed her arms, studying him closely. "Zephora," she repeated. "You're far from home, alien. What could you possibly need from humans?" Zyros stepped forward, desperation bleeding into his words. "My daughter, she cannot walk. Your technology, your exoskeletons, they may be her only hope." Dr. Vargas' eyes softened, but her skepticism remained. "Our tech is designed for human biology. It's not guaranteed to work on your kind." "I don't care," Zyros whispered. "I have to try." There was a long pause as Dr. Vargas weighed his words. Finally, with a sigh, she gestured to the lab. "Then let's see what we can do." For the first time in years, Zyros felt a glimmer of hope. The journey was far from over, but the first step had been taken. And back on Zephora, under the glow of twin moons, Leora waited for the miracle her father was determined to bring home. The sterile hum of Dr. Vargas' lab was unlike anything Zyros had ever encountered. Xyphoran technology was organic, fluid, almost alive. Machines that blended seamlessly with their environment, designed to harmonize with nature. But here on Earth, everything felt rigid and mechanical. The sharp scent of soldered metal filled the air, mingling with the faint buzz of electricity. Despite the stark contrast, Zyros felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps it was in this strange, primitive environment that he would find the answer to Leora's suffering. Dr. Vargas moved with the precision of someone who had spent years mastering her craft. She led Zyros deeper into the lab, past rows of experimental devices and half-assembled machines. The heart of her work was a sleek, metallic exoskeleton, its joints gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. It looked crude compared to Zephyran medical devices, but Zyros could see the brilliance in its design. This machine had given paralyzed humans the ability to walk again. Now, it was Leora's only hope. "This," Dr. Vargas began, her voice tinged with both pride and skepticism, "is the NeuroLift exoskeleton. It interfaces directly with the human nervous system, bypassing damaged neural pathways to stimulate muscle movement. But your daughter isn't human. I don't even know if her physiology will respond to it." Zyros stepped closer, his eyes tracing the intricate web of circuits and fibers. "We'll make it work," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. Dr. Vargas studied him for a moment, then sighed. "We'll need data, scans, genetic markers, neurological maps. Do you have any of that?" Zyros nodded, pulling a small crystalline device from his satchel. It pulsed softly in his hand, containing every piece of medical information about Leora. As he handed it to Dr. Vargas, he realized how much he was placing in her hands, not just his daughter's future, but the trust of an entire species. Zyphorans were proud, and they rarely sought help from others, least of all humans. Dr. Vargas inserted the device into a scanner, and holographic images of Leora's body flickered to life around them. Zyros' heart clenched at the sight of his daughter's fragile form, her muscles underdeveloped, her neural pathways misaligned. Dr. Vargas' eyes narrowed as she examined the data, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. "Your daughter's nervous system is fascinating," she murmured. "It's more complex than anything I've seen in humans, but there's a similarity in how the neural signals transmit. If I can adjust the interface, recalibrate the feedback loops, we might have a chance." Might. The word hung in the air, a fragile thread of hope. For days, they worked tirelessly. Zyros assisted where he could, though much of the human technology was foreign to him. He watched as Dr. Vargas modified the exoskeleton, replacing human-specific components with adaptable interfaces. They ran simulations, testing the device's response to the alien data. Each failure weighed heavily on Zyros, but he refused to give in to despair. Leora's face was always in his mind, her bright eyes, her unwavering spirit. He couldn't return to Zephora empty-handed. As the modifications progressed, Zyros and Dr. Vargas began to understand each other beyond words. Despite their differences, they shared a common goal: to defy the impossible. Dr. Vargas was driven by a deep compassion, hidden beneath her stoic exterior. Zyros saw it in the way she carefully adjusted each circuit, in the long hours she spent poring over Leora's data. She wasn't just doing this as a scientist. She was doing it because she believed in the power of hope. One evening, after hours of meticulous adjustments, Dr. Vargas leaned back in her chair, her eyes weary but determined. "It's ready," she said softly. Zyros stared at the exoskeleton, now sleek and modified, its metallic frame humming with latent energy. But doubt gnawed at the edges of his mind. What if it doesn't work? Dr. Vargas met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Then we try again, and again, until it does." But there was another obstacle, a looming one that neither of them could ignore. Zephyran authorities monitored all off-world technology transfers. If they discovered Zyros bringing human tech back to Zephora, they would confiscate it, possibly detain him, and certainly prevent Leora from ever receiving the help she needed. Zyros knew they had to act quickly and discreetly. They devised a plan to smuggle the exoskeleton back to Zephora. Dr. Vargas had connections, people who operated outside the official channels, willing to risk much for the right cause. They would dismantle the exoskeleton, disguise its components, and ship them through untraceable routes. As they prepared for the final phase of the mission, Zyros felt a mixture of fear and determination. The technology was ready, but the journey home would be even more dangerous than the one that brought him here. And through it all, the question remained, Would the exoskeleton work on Leora? Could human ingenuity succeed where Zephyrin science had failed? As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, Zyros stood on the edge of possibility. The road ahead was fraught with peril, but for the first time in years, he dared to believe in a future where his daughter could walk. The fate of that future now rested in the hands of an alien father and a human scientist, united by a shared hope and an unbreakable determination. The journey back to Zephora was fraught with tension. Zyros had managed to smuggle the modified exoskeleton through Earth's orbital station, piece by piece, hidden within ordinary cargo shipments. Dr. Vargas's network of contacts had proven invaluable, ensuring that no human authorities questioned the odd components leaving their planet. But Zyros knew that the real challenge lay ahead. The Zephyrin authorities were far more vigilant and far less forgiving. When Zyros' ship emerged from the wormhole and entered Zephyrin space, the familiar sight of his home planet filled him with both relief and dread. The twin moons hung in the sky like silent sentinels, and the crystalline cities sparkled beneath the atmospheric glow. But this beauty was overshadowed by the knowledge that his every move would now be watched. He landed under the cover of night, in a remote docking station far from the prying eyes of the central city authorities. His old friend, Kale, was waiting for him. Kale had once been a fellow logistics officer, someone Zyros trusted implicitly, or so he believed. "You're back," Kale greeted, his eyes scanning the horizon nervously. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Zyros nodded, his voice low. "I have the technology, but we must be careful. The authorities can't know." Cal's expression darkened, but he said nothing more as he helped Zyros transport the disassembled exoskeleton to his home. For a brief moment, Zyros allowed himself to feel hopeful. Leora's salvation was within reach. Rayla was waiting when Zyros arrived, her eyes wide with both fear and anticipation. She embraced him tightly, her hands trembling. "Did you really find it?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I did," Zyros replied, his gaze shifting to Leora, who sat silently by the window, her eyes reflecting the twin moons. "We have a chance." Reassembling the exoskeleton was a meticulous process. Zyros worked tirelessly through the night, his hands guided by the memory of Dr. Vargas' instructions. The technology seemed almost alien in their home, its metallic sheen a stark contrast to the organic curves of Zephyrin architecture. But as the final piece clicked into place, Zyros felt a surge of hope unlike any he'd ever known. The first test was cautious. They fitted the exoskeleton to Leora, adjusting the neural interface to match her unique physiology. The machine hummed softly, responding to her faint neural signals. But when Leora tried to stand, her legs trembled and buckled beneath her. The exoskeleton's support wasn't enough. Zyros' heart sank, but he refused to give in. "We need more time," he told Rayla. "It's close. I can feel it." But time was a luxury they didn't have. The betrayal came swiftly and without warning. Zyros awoke one morning to the sound of heavy footsteps outside their home. His heart raced as he peered through the window, spotting the unmistakable uniforms of the Zephyrin authorities. They were here. Someone had informed them. Kale. The realization hit Zyros like a physical blow. His old friend had betrayed him, choosing loyalty to the state over their friendship. Zyros' mind raced. He had to protect Leora and the exoskeleton. "Rayla, take Leora. Hide in the lower chambers," he whispered urgently. "I'll stall them." Rayla's eyes widened with fear, but she didn't hesitate. She scooped Leora into her arms and disappeared into the hidden passages beneath their home. Zyros, his heart pounding, stepped outside to meet the approaching officers. The lead officer, a stern-faced Zephyrin named Commander Varen, regarded Zyros with thinly veiled contempt. "We have reason to believe you've brought unauthorized technology from Earth," he declared. "This is a violation of interplanetary law." Zyros forced himself to remain calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." But Varen was not easily deceived. He signaled to his men, and they began to search the house, tearing through their belongings with ruthless efficiency. Zyros felt helpless, every nerve on edge as he listened to the sounds of destruction. But the hidden chamber remained undetected, for now. As the officers continued their search, Varen turned his cold gaze back to Zyros. "You know the consequences of bringing foreign technology into our world," he said quietly. "If you're hiding something, it won't stay hidden for long." Zyros met his gaze with a defiant stare. "Do what you must." After hours of fruitless searching, the authorities left, but Zyros knew this was only a temporary reprieve. They would return, and next time, they would be more thorough. The betrayal had put them all in grave danger. That night, as the twin moons cast their pale light over the city, Zyros gathered his family. "We can't stay here," he whispered. "We have to run." Rayla nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "Where will we go?" "To the outer territories," Zyros replied. "There are places the authorities don't control. We'll be safe there, and I can continue working on the exoskeleton." Leora, her eyes bright with hope despite her exhaustion, clutched her father's hand. "I believe in you, Papa," she whispered. Zyros felt his heart swell with emotion. No matter the risks, he would not stop until his daughter could walk. The betrayal had only strengthened his resolve. They would escape, they would survive, and he would defy the impossible. As they slipped into the shadows of the night, the exoskeleton hidden beneath their cloaks, Zyros knew their journey was far from over. But he also knew one unshakable truth. Hope was a force far stronger than fear, and he would wield it until the very end. The cold winds of Zephora's outer territories howled through the jagged crystal canyons, their sharp edges glowing faintly under the twin moons. Zyros, Rayla, and Leora moved swiftly through the shadows, the modified exoskeleton disassembled and hidden in their packs. Every step away from their home tightened the knot in Zyros's chest. This was not the life he had imagined for his daughter, on the run, hunted by their own people. But the thought of Leora walking, even if it was for just one moment, kept him moving forward. Their destination was the Dusk Wastes, a vast, desolate stretch of land where the Zephoran authorities had little control. The harsh environment and dangerous wildlife made it inhospitable, but to Zyros it was the perfect refuge. The deeper they ventured, the more treacherous the landscape became. Crystalline cliffs jutted out like jagged teeth, and the ground beneath their feet pulsed with bioluminescent veins, casting eerie shadows on their path. But it wasn't just the natural dangers that haunted them. The authorities were relentless. It started with distant flashes of light in the night sky, patrol ships scanning the terrain. Then came the low hum of hovercrafts, growing louder with each passing day. Zyros knew they were closing in. The betrayal by Kale had given the authorities more than just a tip-off. It had given them a personal vendetta. Zyros wasn't just a fugitive. He was a symbol of defiance against Zephoran pride. And they wouldn't stop until they made an example of him. As they navigated a narrow pass between two towering crystal spires, the unmistakable whine of a patrol ship echoed through the canyon. Zyros's heart pounded. "They found us," he whispered. Rayla tightened her grip on Leora, her eyes darting around for cover. They had only moments before the patrol would be upon them. Zyros scanned the area, his mind racing. Then he saw it, a narrow crevice in the canyon wall, just wide enough for them to slip through. "This way," he hissed, leading his family toward the opening. They squeezed into the crevice just as the patrol ship roared overhead, its searchlights slicing through the darkness. Zyros pressed his back against the cool crystal wall, holding his breath as the light swept dangerously close. Leora clung to her mother, her eyes wide with fear, but silent, understanding the stakes. The ship hovered for a moment, its engines rumbling like a predator sniffing out its prey. Then, after what felt like an eternity, it moved on, disappearing into the distance. Zyros exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing slightly. But they couldn't stay hidden for long. "We need to keep moving," he whispered. They'll be back. As they emerged from the crevice, Zyros noticed something strange. Lyora's hover chair had been damaged in the scramble. It sputtered weakly, its energy reserves nearly depleted. Panic surged through him. Without the chair, Lyora couldn't move. The exoskeleton was still incomplete, and they didn't have the tools to finish the modifications out here. Zyros dropped to his knees beside his daughter, his mind racing. "I'll carry you," he whispered, his voice thick with frustration and fear. But Lyora shook her head, her eyes shining with determination. "No, Papa. I can try." Zyros stared at her, confused. "Try what?" She pointed to the exoskeleton, her small fingers brushing against the cold metal. "We've come this far. Let me try." Rayla gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Zyros, it's not ready." But Zyros saw something in Lyora's eyes, a spark of hope, a flicker of the unbreakable spirit that had carried them through this nightmare. He nodded slowly. "Okay," he whispered. "Let's try." Under the faint glow of the twin moons, Zyros and Rayla carefully assembled the exoskeleton around Lyora's fragile frame. The metal plates clicked into place, wrapping around her legs like a second skin. Zyros adjusted the neural interface, his hands trembling as he calibrated the settings. The system hummed softly, its lights flickering as it synced with Lyora's unique physiology. Lyora took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on her father. "I'm ready." Zyros activated the exoskeleton. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a faint whirring sound filled the air as the exoskeleton responded to Lyora's neural signals. Her legs twitched, the muscles straining against years of inactivity. Zyros held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, shakily, Lyora's right foot lifted off the ground. Rayla gasped, tears streaming down her face. Zyros felt his vision blur, disbelief and hope warring within him. Lyora's other foot followed, and with a determined grunt, she took a step forward. Then another, and another. She was walking. The moment was fleeting, but it was enough. Enough to ignite a fire within Zyros, to solidify his resolve. But their joy was cut short by the distant, growing sound of engines. The patrol ships were back. Zyros snapped into action, scooping Lyora into his arms even as she protested. "We're not ready to fight them yet," he whispered urgently. "But we will be." They ran, the harsh winds of the dusk wastes whipping against their faces. The ground trembled beneath the weight of the approaching ships, their searchlights cutting through the darkness like knives. Zyros knew they couldn't outrun them forever. But they didn't need forever. They just needed time. As they reached the edge of the canyons, Zyros spotted an ancient, abandoned tunnel system, a relic from Zephora's past, long forgotten by the authorities. He led his family into the shadows, the patrol ships thundering overhead. In the darkness of the tunnels, Zyros held Lyora close, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. They had seen the impossible. Lyora had walked. And now, no force in the galaxy could stop them from making that miracle permanent. The chase wasn't over. But for the first time, Zyros knew they had a chance, not just to escape, but to change everything. The tunnels beneath the dusk wastes were ancient, remnants of an old Zephoran civilization long forgotten by modern society. The walls pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins, casting eerie, shifting light that barely illuminated the way. The air was thick and cold, heavy with the scent of minerals and time. Zyros led his family deeper into the labyrinth, every step echoing in the cavernous silence, while the distant hum of patrol ships faded above them. But even here, hidden beneath the earth, Zyros knew they were not safe for long. Lyora clung to his back, the exoskeleton's weight adding a new strain to his already exhausted body. Yet, despite the danger and exhaustion, there was something different in her now. Her eyes shone not with fear, but with determination. She had taken her first steps. That simple act, impossible just days ago, had transformed her into something more than a frightened child. She was ready to fight. They moved for hours, navigating the twisting tunnels, until they found a small cavern deep within the maze. It was a forgotten place, untouched by Zephyrin technology, with walls that shimmered faintly under the soft glow of the twin moons that barely pierced through cracks above. It was here that Zyros decided to make their stand. But they couldn't hide forever. As Rayla prepared a small, makeshift shelter, Zyros pulled out the exoskeleton's control unit. The device had worked, but not perfectly. It was fragile, unstable, and the longer Lyora used it, the more strain it would place on her body. They needed to make adjustments, fine-tune the neural interface. But Zyros was not a scientist, and they no longer had Dr. Vargas' expertise to guide them. Lyora, sensing her father's frustration, placed a small hand on his. "Papa, we can do this," she whispered. "I can feel it working. We just need to believe." Her words reignited a spark within Zyros. He wasn't a scientist, but he was a father. And there was no force in the galaxy stronger than a parent's determination to save their child. For days, they worked tirelessly in the hidden cavern. Zyros reconfigured the exoskeleton settings, using every scrap of knowledge he'd gleaned from Dr. Vargas. Rayla scavenged for supplies, risking brief excursions to abandoned outposts in the wastes. And Lyora, despite the pain and exhaustion, tested the exoskeleton again and again, pushing herself further each time. But the Zephyrin authorities were closing in. The first sign came in the form of a faint tremor beneath their feet, a vibration that grew steadily stronger. Zyros' heart sank. The authorities had discovered the ancient tunnels and were sending ground forces to flush them out. There was no more time. That night, as they prepared for what could be their final confrontation, Zyros sat with Lyora by the dim glow of the exoskeleton's power core. "Are you ready, my little star?" he asked softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Lyora nodded, her eyes fierce. "I'm ready, Papa. We can't run forever." Zyros felt a swell of pride mixed with fear. His daughter had grown stronger than he'd ever imagined, but she was still just a child. Yet in her eyes, he saw a courage that surpassed his own. The following morning, the ground trembled violently as the Zephyrin forces arrived. Their armored hovercrafts descended into the tunnels, their lights piercing through the darkness like hungry predators. Zyros could hear the distant shouts of soldiers, the cold, mechanical commands echoing through the labyrinth. But they were ready. Zyros and Rayla positioned themselves at the narrowest point of the tunnel, a natural chokehold that would slow the authorities' advance. Lyora stood beside them, the exoskeleton humming softly, its lights glowing brighter than before. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as Zyros activated the final sequence. The first wave of soldiers emerged from the shadows, their weapons drawn, expecting to find a desperate, broken family. What they found instead was something far more formidable. Lyora stepped forward, her movements slow but steady. The exoskeleton supported her, amplifying her strength. The soldiers hesitated, momentarily stunned by the sight of the child standing, walking, where none should have been able to. Then chaos erupted. The soldiers surged forward, but Zyros and Rayla were ready. Using scavenged energy pulses and traps, they slowed the advance, forcing the authorities into a bottleneck. But it was Lyora who became the heart of their resistance. With each step she took, the exoskeleton adapted, growing more synchronized with her body. The neural interface, once unstable, now thrummed with perfect alignment. She moved through the chaos with a grace that was both alien and human, defying the limitations that had once imprisoned her. And then it happened. As a soldier aimed his weapon at Zyros, Lyora surged forward, faster than anyone expected. With a strength born not just from the exoskeleton, but from sheer will, she pushed her father out of harm's way, standing between him and the enemy. The soldiers froze, their weapons trembling. The sight was undeniable. An alien child, walking and standing tall, protected by human technology that Zephyrin science had deemed impossible. The commander of the squad, Varen, finally stepped forward, his cold eyes narrowing. "This is an abomination," he hissed, his voice filled with both fear and rage. "You've tainted our blood with primitive human filth." But Lyora met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not tainted," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm proof that you're wrong." The soldiers hesitated, their resolve wavering. They had been taught that Zephyrin's superiority was absolute, that their technology was the pinnacle of advancement. But here, in the depths of their own world, stood undeniable evidence that humanity, primitive, chaotic humanity, had achieved what they could not. Varin raised his weapon, his face twisted with fury. But before he could fire, something unexpected happened. The soldiers lowered their weapons. One by one, they stepped back, their eyes filled with uncertainty and awe. They had seen the impossible, and it had shaken the very foundation of their beliefs. Varin roared in frustration, but he was alone. His authority crumbled in the face of undeniable truth. Zyros stepped forward, his voice steady. "This is not the end," he said, his gaze sweeping over the soldiers. "This is the beginning. We can learn from each other. We can be better." For a long, tense moment, silence hung in the air. Then, slowly, the soldiers retreated, leaving Varin standing alone in the cavern. Defeated, he dropped his weapon and disappeared into the shadows. As the echoes of the confrontation faded, Zyros turned to his daughter, his heart swelling with pride. Lyora stood tall, the exoskeleton humming softly around her, not as a crutch, but as a symbol of hope and unity. They had done the impossible, but more importantly, they had proven that the impossible was only the beginning. The aftermath of their stand in the ancient tunnels rippled through Zephora like a seismic wave, shaking the very foundations of a society built on pride and technological superiority. News of Lyora's miraculous recovery, aided by human technology, spread far and wide. At first, it traveled in whispers, cautious and disbelieving. But as more soldiers recounted what they had witnessed, the whispers grew into a chorus that could not be silenced. Zyros, Rayla, and Lyora returned to their home city under the cautious gaze of a populace torn between awe and skepticism. The authorities could no longer deny what had happened. Commander Varin had disappeared into obscurity, his failure a stain on the pride of the state. But even in his absence, the governing bodies struggled to control the narrative. For the first time in Zephyrin history, their technological dominance was questioned, not by a rival alien species, but by the very beings they had considered primitive. Lyora's return became a symbol of something much greater than her personal triumph. She represented a bridge between worlds, a living testament to the power of collaboration between species once separated by suspicion and prejudice. But with that symbol came both admiration and resistance. The medical community was the first to respond. Alien doctors who had once dismissed human technology now flocked to study the exoskeleton, their pride tempered by undeniable results. Some approached Zyros with genuine curiosity, eager to learn and integrate human advancements into their own medical practices. Others, however, viewed the technology as a threat, a dangerous precedent that undermined Zephyrin's scientific authority. A public inquiry was launched to investigate how human technology had been smuggled into Zephora and why it had succeeded where Zephyrin medicine had failed. Zyros was summoned to testify before the High Council, a group of elders who had long dictated the planet's technological and cultural direction. The Grand Hall, carved from shimmering crystal, was packed with spectators eager to witness the proceedings. Standing before the council, Zyros felt the weight of his journey pressing down on him. But as he looked out over the sea of faces, some hostile, some hopeful, he knew that his mission was far from over. "Why did you betray your people by seeking help from humans?" one council member demanded, his voice echoing through the hall. Zyros met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't betray my people. I saved my daughter. And in doing so, I showed that our strength doesn't lie in isolation, but in collaboration." A murmur swept through the audience, the weight of his words sinking in. Another council member, older and more contemplative, leaned forward. "And what do you propose?" Zyros of Zephora, that we abandon our advancements in favor of human technology. Zyros shook his head. No, I propose that we combine our knowledge. Human technology isn't a threat to us, it's an opportunity. Together, we can achieve more than we ever could alone. The hall fell into a tense silence as the council deliberated. The decision they made would shape Zephora's future and its relationship with Earth. Weeks passed before the council announced their verdict. To the surprise of many, they ruled in favor of exploring collaborative efforts with humanity. They couldn't ignore the evidence, the living, breathing proof in Leora, who now walked freely through the city streets, her steps a quiet rebellion against the old ways. With the council's blessing, a delegation of Zephoran scientists and diplomats was sent to Earth to establish formal relations. Dr. Elena Vargas, whose tireless work had made Leora's recovery possible, was invited to Zephora as a guest of honor. When she arrived, stepping onto Zephoran soil for the first time, the crowd that greeted her was a mixture of awe and cautious curiosity. Zyros and his family stood at the forefront of this new alliance. Their home became a symbol of unity, a place where human and Zephoran scientists worked side by side, sharing knowledge and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Leora, once confined to a hover chair, now ran through the crystalline gardens with other children, her laughter a reminder that hope could overcome even the deepest divides. But the journey was not without its challenges. Not all Zephorans welcomed the change. Groups formed in secret, opposing the integration of human technology, fearing it would dilute their culture and identity. There were protests, acts of sabotage, and heated debates in the public sphere. Zyros knew that true change would take time, and that resistance was a natural part of progress. Despite the opposition, the alliance flourished. New medical breakthroughs emerged from the collaboration, helping not just Zephorans, but other species across the galaxy. Diseases once thought incurable were treated with hybrid technologies that blended the best of both worlds. The success of Leora's exoskeleton led to a new era of mobility aids, designed for various alien physiologies, giving hope to countless individuals who had been told they would never walk. As the years passed, Leora grew into a symbol not just of medical triumph, but of unity and resilience. She spoke at interplanetary conferences, sharing her story and advocating for continued collaboration between species. Her voice, once small and uncertain, now carried the weight of experience and hope. Zyros and Rayla watched their daughter with pride, knowing that their journey, filled with fear, betrayal, and sacrifice, had sparked a movement that transcended their family. They had not only saved Leora's future, but had helped shape the future of their world and beyond. One evening, as the twin moons cast their light over the crystalline city, Leora stood beside her father, looking out over the horizon. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked softly. Zyros nodded, his gaze distant. "I do, but I wouldn't change a thing. Our struggle brought us here, and here is where we're meant to be." Leora smiled, her steps steady and strong as she walked forward into a future once thought impossible. And somewhere, far beyond Zephora's skies, the story of a father's love and a child's courage continued to inspire, reminding the galaxy that hope, when combined with determination and unity, could overcome even the greatest of odds.